In this show, we'd love to welcome Bonnie. Bonnie is from a business and policy background. Bonnie is passionate about scaling businesses focused on decarbonisation, using her skill sets to strategically advise electrification startups and scale-ups, helping them accelerate the market adoption to electrified transportation. Bonnie is a true advocate and market expert within the sector and is front and centre with legislators, regulators, and the EV industry stakeholders across the US, and especially looking into federal and state levels. In this conversation, we're going to touch on Bonnie's views on fleet electrification in general, some of the tailwinds and headwinds faced by some of the startups that she's working with, and also the importance of cross-training into the sector and some about the talent gap. So, Bonnie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I love that introduction. Makes me sound quite an interesting person.
Well, you made it on here for a reason, so I think being interesting was definitely part of it. So Bonnie, I'd love to start by giving our listeners, a bit of an overview of your areas of expertise. I touched on a few of those earlier, but I'm sure I didn't do them justice. So, please give us a quick high-level overview of your areas of expertise.
So I always kind of describe myself as somewhat of an fearless adventurer in terms of both on work and off work. You can't really put me on a straitjacket and say these are her skill sets, because I have pivoted industries, I've pivoted disciplines. David Ogilvy, the famous advertising guru, once said the secret behind his success and his organization's success was something called divine discontent, and very paradoxical if you on the face of it. But I found that to be incredibly profound, and have kind of taken it to heart and kind of led my life to some extent with that philosophy, whereby, anytime I've got, too comfortable or complacent, either by circumstance or by choice, I've pivoted to doing some different work. So I have disrupted telecom, where I was working on product marketing, to completely a different field where I had no knowledge, which was clean energy, and now into clean transport, and via a stint in the government, because I thought if I was going to get into a regulated business, I should understand policy making and regulatory work up front and close. So as you mentioned, I wasn't, but over the years, I've become an absolute passionate advocate of all things fueled by clean electrons, and really excited to be in a space where I get to play and work with startups that are working ferociously every day to create solutions to save this planet, because we have no planet B. So my skill set is at the intersection of technology, business, and policy, if you will, if I had to try and straitjacket what I do.
Well, I think that's really interesting, and we'll come on to a bit more about your journey, and because I know it's been a good one. But can you give our listeners a quick overview of Plug2Grid and a bit about like you said, you're playing at the moment. I love that phrasing. You're playing with some of the startups, and I know you enjoy it there. So yeah, I'd love to know a bit about the company and what you're focusing on.
So PlugtoGrid Strategies is a very niche advisory firm that works with founders and co-founders primarily in the clean transport space, though I have worked in the clean tech space as well. Its remit is that we take an holistic approach to the business. How do we scale the business? It's not a short-term kind of project thing. So the other thing with Plug2Grid, as it happens, is through that I've actually come to form my own startup in the charging infrastructure space, which is currently in stealth mode, and very excited about the solution we're going to bring to the fleet market. So in terms of the work that Plug2Grid Strategies does, is really working with founders and co-founders across the business spectrum, whether that's being in the energy space. Obviously, policy and regulation takes a very central role in the go-to-market, but also as a startup scaling business, and that means sales takes center stage. And being in the industry as long as I have, and being the person I am, I do have a broad network that have been hugely supportive of the work I've been doing and supporting the startups that I have been, as you say, playing with. But really been a fascinating experience thus far.
And what was that moment where, PlugtoGrid what was the inception point of that? How did it come alive in your mind? Because it obviously from a passion, but what was the kind of the light bulb moment for you when you decided to build?
Yeah, it, like, many things in life, it happens. Serendipity played a role, and there was a VC, a lady very entrenched in the space, very smart, and she had just her firm had just invested in a clean tech startup, and she reached out and she said, what do you think about being an advisor to them, because they could do with your help? And I hadn't thought about it at all, because I come from uh, work for multinationals, work for the government, very structured, and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And that's how PlugtoGrid was born, because I really enjoyed that process. And I said, why not? And that was a little over 2.5 years ago.
Wow, awesome! It's interesting how those things just sort of pop up if you let them. So you touched on the multinational piece there, and obviously we are very interested in your background, prior to PlugtoGrid. So, let's give our listeners an overview of who they're listening to and what the journey's been.
Oh, it's been one of uh, what would I say, across mountains and valleys, as many people's journeys are. But what I've done is to seize the opportunities that were provided to me. I think that's very important, because we often don't know many things, and when they're presented to us, we kind of go, "Oh my God, should I?" Um, but like you said, I started my career in a multinational environment. In fact, I started my career as an intern in Ogilvy, and did pretty well, I guess, because was, very soon transferred to the regional headquarters in Singapore to run um, a huge multinational client in the telecom space that the agency had just won across all, I think it was at that time, 18 countries of Asia Pacific. And that was my introduction to telecom. As you can imagine, this was the transition to how the internet got into our pocket. So from there on, I actually moved on to work with Nokia and ran their product marketing business unit for 15 countries in Asia Pacific for the enterprise part of Nokia, which was both the handsets as well as the enterprise units. And that's when I started reading about something called smart meters and smart grids that was being talked about in Scandinavian countries. And like I said, I'm a curious creature. And I said, what is that? It sounds kind of familiar to what we did in telecom, move from analog to digital. And I had no idea about anything to do with electricity, like none whatsoever. I didn't know the difference between kilowatt and kilowatt hour. And from there on, that's when I decided that, yeah, I've done this. Now it's time to do something else, but I need to learn. And that's when I made the decision to move to the government. And I was incredibly fortunate to have been hired by the inward investment arm of the Singapore government, learned a huge amount about policymaking, regulation, how countries bring in investment, and more importantly, the workforce and talent that a country needs to prepare to attract these kind of investments. Um, and that's my journey would have carried on in Singapore through the energy system, except at that point, life made us move to the United States. And that was a complete unexpected turn that I at least had not anticipated at all, and did not at all was ready for what it would mean for me professionally, because US has very you may be familiar with very stringent immigration rules for who can work and under what circumstances. So I was like, well, you want to work in this space, you're here, what are you going to do about it? So I went straight down to the boots and went and started working as an advisor in policy firm in Silicon Valley. They wanted somebody who understood technology, could put that to in the context of policy and smart grid and smart meters. And that was about a decade ago, and I've not looked back. And since then, kind of moved on and worked for a large German conglomerate, ran their regulatory affairs and market development for North America and Southeast Asia, and worked on smart energy, so advanced metering infrastructure, and then on to clean transport. So a lot has happened in a decade.
Yeah, no, you've definitely been busy. It's interesting when we looked at your profile. Moving from such a large organization as to the German organization you're working for into the startup world. We are seeing a few people trying to navigate that move. Looking back on that time, what were some of the tailwinds, but also what advice would you give to yourself making that move again, coming out of the corporate world
into a world where you have to do everything?
into a world you have to do everything? Yeah.
I think that's the first thing I said. Be ready to do everything. I think in many ways, I would say I was ready for it, even though I wasn't actually had a roadmap and planned out and everything. But mentally, I think I was ready for it. I've worked in large organizations all my life. And I think while large organizations have huge benefits and huge opportunities, but they also tend to kind of hem you into kind of swim lanes, if you will. And I've always been somebody who thinks laterally, who has diverse skill sets. And I kind of look at problems in many different ways and say, I tend to ask why not as opposed to why. And sometimes in large organizations, people with that kind of mindset can feel a bit restricted. And so I think I was ready to get into an environment where I could absolutely blue sky and think of every solution that there could exist for a challenge that we are facing, without having to think about which business unit needs to sign off on that and whose toes should I absolutely not tread upon. So I think mentally I was ready for it. Now, was I completely, is it like I said, did I have a roadmap? No, I didn't. But I made that up on the way. And I think I've been very fortunate that some of the people who I've worked with have hugely supported and provided a helping hand. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons I can give people, that build your network, not just for, just like for being business only, build it as a human to human relationship, because you'd be surprised just how many people will lend a helping hand. And also remember to help other people too.
And I think it's important, when we're coaching people through that kind of transition, it's very easy to maybe look at the romantic side of the startup world and think, you join and you sail off into the sunset on your yacht, where it's like people forget that windy journey that's on that road. And it's interesting, you mentioned something there about kind of you sounded like you were very comfortable with being uncomfortable, that there wasn't a roadmap, and you were okay with that. And that's I don't know. I don't know if I could do that, but you need to be a special character to embrace that.
I think, we often underestimate ourselves. So you think you can't, and when you're faced with something and you think, why not? Yeah, sure. I mean, what's the worst? You're aiming for the moon, you will land on the roof. It's not so bad, you know. But at least, when you look back, you say, hey, I gave it a try. It's awful if you look back and said, I wish I tried, always try.
So we'll come on to a bit into sort of the startup world again. I'm really curious about. So I've got some other questions, but I'd like to sort of dig in a little bit to fleet electrification. Right, you mentioned earlier, and we won't talk about your startup in stealth mode, but I'd love to know about sort of zooming out a little bit, and then we'll zoom in. So zooming out, to sort of people that are maybe not educated about sort of fleet electrification, and why is this such a game changer for the US?
I would say just not the US, but across global. When I think about fleets in developing world using, diesel, it just makes my heart like stop. Like, how do we change these things? Um, the fleet electrification aspect, while still very nascent right now, it's very, very early stages, has the potential to really overtake the non-fleet segment simply because of the momentum behind it. Just take the US, for example, the medium and heavy duty vehicle category, which many comprise in the fleet category, is responsible for over 25% of the GHG emission compared to the population on the road. So, rightly, policymakers and regulators are taking a real hard look as to how to address this issue, because the disproportionate amount of GHG and other noxious fumes that are being emitted are really, impacting communities, especially along interstates, a lot of disadvantaged and low-income communities. So, rightly, a lot of focus on this, and for that, we think it will kind of electrify sooner than the non-fleet segment. Now, when I talk about fleets, I'm talking both human-driven and autonomous fleets. The other reason why I think it's going to be an exciting and probably fast-moving segment is that fleet electrification gives an opportunity for diverse, what we call behind-the-meter technologies, such as for generation purpose or storing purpose, like renewables, like solar or energy storage, to come together to create microgrids, if you will, to provide power on site to the chargers, and then also be able to provide power to buildings that may be on the side. So there are diverse loads that come to play at a fleet electrification site. And it's exciting simply because thus far, energy has been a siloed field, transport has been a siloed field. And in transport electrification, we see these two very diverse segments come together. And it's exciting because these technologies are coming together to play. So think about this site with all its generation capacity and its storing capacity, charging capacity, being able to island should the grid go down and then continue to function. Whereas conversely, should the grid need it, then they're able to supply power as well. So it truly becomes a modernized aspect of the grid that integrates so many disparate aspects of the electric system that we know, and then the evolving aspects of transport electrification. Now, I know I got a bit weedy, but this is why it excites us, and this is why we are creating a solution that will provide. I mean, it's an incredibly complex category. we're not denying that, simply because think about it. Fleet operators, people who own trucks or vans, the mom and pop shop in the who's doing the laundry downtown might have a fleet of 5 vans, and all they ever did was to just go to the gas station, use a credit card, and fill gas. And now here we are talking about all these things. So it is a complex issue on the face of it. But what I think startups like what we are creating and many others, what they're trying to do is to have an easy button to make sure this transition from ICE to electrons becomes an easy, quick button for the customers that are or will be in many ways mandated to make this transition.
I can imagine a lot of it's about confidence, right? Whether you're Amazon or whether you're the mom and pop shop, if things go down and your trucks can't go out, that's going to be something that's very front of mind at the moment. So I think everyone that we speak to kind of can see what the future holds, but I think it's sometimes hard to see what the here and now needs. In your opinion, if you have to summarize what the fleet electrification marketplace needs at the moment, what's the first step, or the step that should be next in your view?
There needs to be a charging solution that is easy to deploy, is cost effective, and is not an IT project to integrate. We need to give fleet operators, this person, whether it's the Amazons of the world, something that is easy, instills confidence in them, and is able to support their immediate duty cycles as they make this transition, because not all of it will transition at the same time. We're looking between now and 2040 when all vehicles in this category in California will need to be electric. So whilst we think, maybe 15 years is a long time, or 17 years, whatever that may be, it isn't, because you think about vehicle life cycles. You might change them every 10 years or 12 years, depending on what the vehicle is. So the transition needs to start happening. But what, as you rightly ask, what is the thing that they need most? And they need something that is easy and that they can understand. And it's, they're not going, what is a demand charge? So these are solutions where people, like charging as a service operators are coming and saying, okay, we'll take that headache off you. This is what you need. That's it. kWh per mile for 10 years. That's it. And those are the kind of solutions we are looking for.
And with the access that you have to the technology and the information, the strategic minds that are in the industry at the moment, as you kind of close your eyes and picture what the world's going to look like in your crystal ball, where will this take us? What do you think we'll see more of in the future?
I think electrification is no longer in debate. That, I think, is kind of done. Doesn't matter where you are, what your political leanings are, climate change is staring at our face. And I think it's impacting people across spectrum and across, whether you're in a developing world or in a first world, doesn't matter. I think that is a given. Now, how quickly that transition happens and how governments support its constituents to make this transition, that's going to be the kind of unknown factor. Some will move faster and some will be slower. I think a lot of, unfortunately, politics gets in the way. In Europe, this unfortunate, I cannot believe we are saying this in the 21st century, we have a war on the European mainland. It's absolutely shocking. But if you think about what could be something good that comes out of this terrible human crisis, is maybe European countries that were a little slow to make this transition will start thinking and they already are, about the need for energy security and diversity of energy sources. So I think I see some of these things happening going forward in terms of the speed of transition, and what kind of technologies get deployed before others. I think those are the kind of nuances. Overall, we are moving to electrification.
It's happening. It's happening. It'd be nice to know that it's happened. And it must be so exciting to be part of that, people that are trailblazing that, right? Because you will look back and be like, oh yeah, it happened. It happened.
It happened. It happened. I look back at telecom that way and I say, I was part of that. Yeah.
That's how you're living your purpose. I love it. And we know that sort of electrification aside, as I mentioned before, we're seeing there's obviously a talent gap, right? And we're talking clean tech more generally, whether it's electrification, whether it's hydrogen, whatever part of the market. And one of the things that people is maybe a blind spot for some of those people is kind of, if they are looking at the startup world, what's happening behind the scenes. So, what are some of the sort of tailwinds and headwinds that you see C-suite in startups faced with at the moment, and what are they kind of overcoming? And then we'll maybe come on to the talent gap more specifically.
I mean, I'm an optimist, so I'll take the tailwinds first. And I think we talked about it a little bit before. As we said, I think the fact that the UN Secretary General in New York told BBC that climate change is an existential threat. And he used those words. And I think more and more we are getting governments across all continents and across all levels in big and small ways becoming aware of that. And so what is resulting is policymaking and regulation that is accelerating this transition. Now you can take examples of, the US. We were, from 2016 through 2020, we had very little movement in this space at the federal level. Yet, the Biden administration's legislation has been an absolute amazing piece of kind of tailwind for the clean tech industry. It will forever kind of transfer the landscape in the United States across, manufacturing, across infrastructure, across workforce. And that it's monumental what the administration has achieved in the first 2 years. Then at the state level, we look at, these states like California, New York, who are, the really at the beachhead, announcing bans on ICE vehicles. So I think these are huge tailwinds for large organizations that are transitioning. So if you think about traditional vehicle OEMs, who in the past 4 years and in the previous administrations were kind of tiptoeing about, didn't think they had to do anything, but all of a sudden completely pivoting and now making commitments for 2025, 2030. Should have done that earlier. So I think that it's tailwinds for both large organizations and definitely for startups because, our vision, our technologies need support, both financially and market certainty. And I think this gives us some of that. That's all the great things. But now let's talk about what some of the ground realities will be. Obviously, we've just lived through once in a generation pandemic, and I think in many ways it changed businesses and how we perceive work, and in many ways very, very differently. But it created, again, once in a generation we hope, supply chain issues that impact directly, especially for startups. And then the consequent kind of monetary fiscal policy and the kind of government support, a lot of money in the system created this huge inflationary period that now we are experiencing, and what will happen going forward. I mean, it's uncertain, but we're definitely entering difficult period for the next, maybe 12 to 18 months. Let's hope it's a short one. But from a startup perspective, obviously this makes fundraising a difficult prospect. So that in one way, that's obviously a big headwind. But I think, in my perspective, I feel that, and these are situations which kind of differentiate a solid startup with a solid, kind of go to market and good technology, to, absolutely be aware of where they put their resources and be very focused on their approach, so not as to waste resources. So I think those are some of the headwinds that we should be prepared for, that we at least are preparing for. So, being very, very careful about what we are doing, where we are focusing, where we are spending our resources.
Thank you for that. And when you look at the segments of some of the startups that are out there, obviously, EV charging is, there's a lot in that world at the moment. But what other sort of subsectors are you super excited about now? Just before we move on to the talent gap.
Oh, I think personally, I'm excited about energy storage. I think if we are going to make this transition to 100% clean energy, storage is going to make it or break it. And whilst we've been, very familiar with kind of the lithium ion based energy storage, which is one of the startups that I work with, is working to specifically develop solution for fleet electrification. Um, I think all the R&D work that is going into the storage segment, as well as the funding that the federal government is making in this R&D space, is incredibly exciting. I think you've seen, some of the technologies raising a lot of kind of funds. We hope they make it, because we will need storage, because the sun will always not shine and the wind will always not blow. We need to store that energy, because that's what's going to make us get off fossil fuel.
Amazing. And we spoke about this one quite a lot when we first connected, but as the industry grows and as the sector grows, we need people to grow along with it. If you're sort of assessing some of the talent gaps, I suppose my last two questions would be, where should we get the next clean tech professionals from? Which sectors do you feel, and transverse that bridge? And second of all, what would be your advice to people that are obviously believe in the cause, want to make a difference, want to live their purpose, but hey, they've been doing this for 10, 15 years. It's a bit of a risk to move. So double question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it before we close.
Yeah. So I think it is interesting. There's been a lot of people like me from telecom background who made the transition to clean energy, and I can't say there's a reason to it, but I think it is this ability to see how a traditional industry could morph with the help of technology into a huge potential. I think we saw that in telecom, and I think that's made us think, okay, which other industry, and we saw that in electricity and energy, and how do you transition that into clean. So I think I'm seeing people come from very different segments. I think I see a lot of people moving from the finance segment, which pleases me no end. I'm like, yes, please leave Wall Street and join the clean street. Go on, we need that. So I'm seeing a lot of diversity, and I think um, as this segment attracts more and more kind of new technologies, new kind of people coming in with diverse ideas, I think we will see transition from, I won't kind of say only this segment should transit. I think it should be open to all. You need to feel that our house is burning. We need to do something. So in your own small way, you don't have to be fighting fires in California, Sierra Nevada, but do something that might help those people fight those fires. If that's a drone technology or something else, doesn't matter. So I think that interest has to be there. Just because EVs and electrification is sexy doesn't mean that shouldn't be the reason enough. You have to have a feeling or be passionate about the fact that you want to contribute. And if that's what your thought process is, you can come from any background. I don't believe in academic excellence. I believe in attitude. You have the right attitude and you have the ability to do hard work, you can achieve anything. You can do anything. And I would say life is a sine curve. It goes down, it goes up. And you might be sitting in an up curve in your fancy office in Wall Street. I don't know. Maybe it will not always be there. So, like death and taxes, the only thing constant in life is change. So be brave, be fearless, and go forth. Enjoy the ride. I mean, it's no fun sitting in one place. Just go for the ride.
Just go for it. I love it. I think that's a brilliant place to leave it. Thank you, Bonnie. This has been really insightful. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today.
No, I love it. Thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective. I really appreciate the opportunity, and especially if I can encourage more women to come into our space from whichever segment they may be in, then I would have contributed a little bit to my gender. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you, Ben.